This takes a lot of repetition, a lot of practice. It takes like 5 or 6 years even.
There's no way to know if your foundations are awful or not, if you can't do anything without the extra icing on the cake. But it's very like shocking to realize how much we rely on Control Z as an example.
Two business guys visit a poor country. They come back, one says,
What's up, everybody? Welcome to a new Lightshare episode. Today we're going to talk about the lost art of drawing and painting and concept art. Not many people are practicing their fundamentals as much, and that's
surprising.
Kind of a problem. Yeah. To get jobs, to get opportunities, and we kind of want to deep dive into that, how these things are important. You shouldn't sacrifice them for other skills, other shortcuts.
Let's say the tools or methodologies or the pipelines are sort of dictated by what the industry needs. And if speed and quality are part of that equation, then you're going to have to find a way to make it work. So that's how you rely a lot more on, let's say, things that help you get a more accurate result, like let's say 3D and lighting or perspective, because it fixes all those things with a render, right? Plus you have the benefit of an animated camera or something you can move around in 3D, so you can get another view instantly without additional effort. But that's how I get the point of what you mean by this. That is kind of steering you away from the essential path, which is drawing, painting, doing it all from your own mind instead of relying on some other precise tool or something to do it for you. But as you can see, that's how things are morphing and evolving. And as long as they don't remove this creativity factor, I would say it's still part of it. You can always draw stuff on your own. You can always, there's stuff that no one can take away from you. That's my point. You can always work on your own projects. You can always come up with your own paintings and illustrations. And if you don't like that job particularly, you can do your best to scale it up and change maybe. And I would say it's a part of it, you know?
First of all, I'm surprised by your response to the theme, because to me, when we came up with the idea of like, oh, let's talk about the lost art of drawing and painting, instead of thinking, hey, this is the world, like we're not doing that anymore, what I actually thought was how people are so less invested in drawing and painting right now because of the new tools, that their outcome, it's becoming like worse and worse because they don't have the foundation of drawing and painting before. So
exactly,
it's coming rarer and rarer. Yeah, but then like instead of saying like, oh, this is the new job and like deal with it, my idea would be to say that the only way that it will improve your final outcome, even if you use those new tools, would be to going back to drawing and painting by hand. I think there's one thing about crafts, right? Any job that is a craft, that is something that like a skill that I have to learn. There is the practice time that is essential for you to truly understand what is it that you're doing. It doesn't matter if it's like art or any other thing that requires a set of skills like that, because let's say that right now I can make an image like 10 times quicker than before. It might be an advantage from a work perspective, but it's actually like hindering your own progress as an artist. You know, it's as if you were advertising that, oh, I can do less mileage now. No, it's like, is that really an advantage?
The point was that you're in a market now, and you don't get to dictate that market. It's more like a giant machine, right? That you're a part of.
Fair enough, but the only way that you survive the market is to make your work better.
Level. Yeah, at an individual level, you can choose to tackle this issue your own way. Say, like, if you want to change the world, you should embody that change. You should be the first one, right?
I also think that this way that we're going into hyper-realistic environments and Blender and all this stuff, I think it's great for all the production stuff, because you need all that stuff, right, for the call-outs, sheets, and everything for the 3D artist. But yeah, when it comes down to like your personal work, I think it loses that expressiveness that we see in drawing and painting, right?
The style, personality.
And it almost becomes manufactured when you see like nobody drawing and painting on their work. Like it looks like an in-game screenshot when you look at pictures nowadays, and there's just like a few brushstrokes, maybe like in one or two places, and that's it.
Ain't it funny how that's the impressive part we all pursue in the beginning? Like, it's so difficult to achieve. I want to do that. Make it as realistic as possible so people no longer distinguish it from a real picture. But then as soon as you get there, you look back and you realize that the stylized, and don't get me wrong, the stylized, I don't mean like, you know, you don't need to make it abstract or anything like that, but to make it look like it's painted, like it's clearly
From an
something
artist.
crafted. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not something a camera captured. And even cameras have like different filters and lenses and stuff like that you can play with to achieve different results that drive you away from the, I don't mean to put it like this, but the boring reality, because that's your purpose. It's to frame this thing in the most creative way possible so it looks visually appealing. It kind of touches those strings, in your heart and stuff. Makes you feel something, the emotional side of art. And don't get me wrong about it is what it is, you have to deal with it, like that's not how I meant it. What I meant to say is that at some degree, you don't seem to get to choose that because it's what the industry dictates. Is that if that's how they make games nowadays, you have to abide by that. If that's how they make movies nowadays, you have to abide by that. But within that same equation, I think that you still have the power to change the course of that. All it takes is one first step. And that's how you see a lot of brave figures that take that stand and just stick for what they believe in. And soon enough, a lot of other people start to come sit with them at that table because they believe in what they do. And they're like, okay, now that I see you doing this, you know what? I think it's working. So that's how you get movies that are, I don't know, I'm just thinking now, when I said the stylized thing or
Like Spider-Verse or...
Exactly. That's the very, very one that I'm thinking of, right? So you watch that and it's like there's something special about it. Different. I think that's the word. Different. Different could mean bad too, don't get me wrong. But in this case, it's something you sort of resonate with. It's pleasant to watch. It's interesting.
Or like a Jabaro from Love, Death, and Robots.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like hand-painted backgrounds.
When you go to the highly realistic kind of stuff, you have to resort to other methods to make it stand out somehow. Either by the story or the photography decisions, the camera angles. If everything's just pixel perfect, highly loyal to like reality, it becomes boring unless you give it a spin. There's 1,000 ways, guys. There's 1,000 ways to make something unique. But the topic of this episode is the lost art of drawing and painting, which is something that we no longer do as much due to the nature of our jobs, which ironically enough should be the foundations of. But because of the way tools have evolved nowadays, I don't mean to say we're forced to use this or that, but sometimes that's what your job demands. And if they want you to use this program to get it done, which is not always the case, it shouldn't be, because the results matter more than the process in most cases. But as you can see, I'm getting into a lot of complicated nuances here because sometimes the process matters as well, because they want to be there in the feedback loop and they want you to be able to make quick changes. And that's where, for instance, 3D helps a lot. Unless you're a fucking genius and in 5 minutes you get another shot done for them from another perspective, right? That's how you will approach it, because you look for the path of least resistance, let's say, from a professional perspective. You want to get it done fast, good, to look accurate. And then when you're on your own, let's say, when you get enough time to practice on your own, then you can experiment with those things and get your, satisfy your inner cravings for art and stuff.
I do think that the whole idea of like, oh, it's the outcome that matters. That's the very reason why going back to drawing and painting is important. Yeah, of course, like on a work environment, you should think of like any means necessary to reach the goal. But what is very useful to understand is that the base knowledge that will allow you to squeeze the most out of any tool that you use, it's back on the drawing and painting. It's back there. When you strip yourself from like any tool and then you try to create art with that, that's when you see what's you versus what's the tool giving you. For what we do, concepting, and like what you say, like editing reality to make it more interesting, that's basically what we do. Like, right, we twist things and we create things to make the world around us more interesting, more exciting. And the very tool that will give you the power to do that is like yourself, right? It's the knowledge that you have. And the only way to acquire that knowledge is to take a few steps back on your own, like personal practice, realize what's in the pure sense, like you as an artist, right? And the only way to do that is to make the tools like as simple as possible and as stripped down as possible. So that way you understand like, okay, this is how far my knowledge and my own personal experience is taking me versus this is what I can achieve with my tools, right? So let's say that the outcome is like this thing. How far into this process does your own personal influence takes, and how much of it is the software giving you? You see that all the time with like 3D software, where people, they design things that are easy to do with each specific software, right? Let's say they're using Blender. You see a lot of similar things done with Blender because that's what's easy to do with Blender. And then you see ZBrush, and there is a lot of like things that are very similar done with ZBrush, and people call them designs. But the reality is that, whatever is easy to do in that software, that's what the person is doing. And then you see people that are way better, and they're actually like designers. People like Vitali. He knows what each software is good for, and he flips between them, making his own decisions and not letting the tool dictate what
let's
the
say
outcome
he
will
chooses
be.
that 5% of each software to combine it into his own, let's say, master software.
Yeah, it's because it's the only way for you to like have that voice, right? If you use, let's say they're using PhotoBash as an example, right? If you just throw the photo into your image, that's the photo calling the design for you. If you only paint, that's only like you painting that is calling the outcome for you. But then if you combine both and you edit the photo with your own painting skills, that's where I feel like you would get more of that design ownership. It will be kind of like the best of both worlds, right? Like you are combining the faithfulness of the photo with your design skills.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say about the reference, Like they say, steal like an artist, right? Like you don't choose one single source. And this is actually a
10
major...
different sources. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And it's a way that we also discussed. It's a topic we also discussed in many other videos. It's a vastly applied philosophy, actually. Same story with learning anything. You don't choose a single source. You find many different sources, compare, filter through your own process, and then you choose what stays in, what stays out. Same story with this. Design is no different. Like you choose a bunch of sources, references, you combine them together into something unique, and that's the goal.
Your mark making is also kind of like your style. When you're drawing and painting, that's the mark of the artist. Whereas like if everything is just all manufactured through PhotoBash or only 3D, which there are 3D artists out there and have their own kind of style and look. But if we're talking about concept art, like a concept artist just doing 3D, I think it loses that sense of the artistry within that. So if you want your own style, you have to experiment. You have to like try out different things, try your painting styles. Don't just watch a tutorial and then copy that tutorial, Make sure you try to extract knowledge from that, extract knowledge from another place, and then put it into your melting pot of tools and knowledge, and then paint something that's yours, right? This takes a lot of repetition, a lot of practice. It's not just like, I do it a few times and then I land my style. It takes like 5 or 6 years even if it comes to that point. Like for me, it took that long in that instance. So you really have to find out what works for you, and then eventually you'll craft your voice, you'll craft who you are as an artist.
I'm still figuring it out, like I'm still trying, like I'm still every year going back to like drawing basics and painting basics and reading books on that, and like taking less and less like tools into my process just to see what like the raw thing actually is. Because if you build on top, it's kind of like the idea of like polishing a third, right? Like if your foundation is awful, first of all, how do you know if your foundation is awful, right? There's no way if you're always using those tools, right? There's no way to know if your foundations are awful or not if you can't do anything without the extra icing on the cake, So like just do like a raw thing, draw on paper, like paint on, I would say paint on paper, like if you can, but it's very like shocking to realize how much we rely on Ctrl-Z as an example. Yesterday I was drawing on my sketchbook on my actual table, and my hand went to like Ctrl-Z to like the actual like paper drawing, and I was like, oh shit.
It's just a reflex, muscle memory.
Yeah. Like using Blender, using the pre-assets that are out there on the marketplace. It's easy to just build stuff and like kit bash and make it really like out of this world almost, with those assets and everything. But then when it comes down to like doing a painting, it's like, oh, I don't have my assets. I don't have my asset library. So now you have to like come up in your mind these assets from your visual library. And that's the hard part that I think a lot of people struggle with. How do I paint something on the fly or draw something?
The thing is, it feels like there's no guidebook to this, It's like the creative field is like creative. It's the point of it. You have to come up with ways to achieve the same thing in a different way or in a convenient way sometimes. Because that's the thing, right? I think it all comes down to a matter of convenience. And digital is very convenient. I was just reminding myself now of this book that I have from I forgot if it's The Hobbit but it's like concept art for the movies. And they have these beautiful pieces, pencil sketches, and they're beautiful. Interiors, exteriors, characters, weapons. It's amazing. And I'm thinking, who can do that at a professional level and be on schedule? Because those guys might be freaking fast. Digital makes it a lot more convenient for a number of reasons, and it's probably why we're sticking with it at this point. And this is my point earlier, right? This is how it evolved. It evolved to the point where the standard is this. It's like you have to know this program, digital, you have to send sketches, review, final piece, 3D block out. Then you have to have some knowledge on some basic 3D softwares. You have to know this as well and that as well. And it's like a bunch of new, let's say, skills that are piling up on the list. And that just comes from a necessity standing point, I think it's the way it's evolving. And I want to say something, and I want to know what you guys think about this, because I do believe that instead of you adapting to the industry, you could at some point kind of become something impossible to ignore, that the industry looks at you and says, that's how we're doing things now. Let's change it. Because the way you do things are so maybe effective or inspiring that it changes the wave of the whole thing, the
landscape of the industry.
Okay, I have a couple of cents to give towards that. Like, first of all, it's very idealistic to think that way, because although that's possible, what are the odds as well that like you will be the one like snowflake that will change the world? But because like you said a lot of things, so let me organize my thoughts. The first thing that I would say is the fact that you have to try a multitude of tools nowadays to be relevant to the industry. I think that's a positive thing because it encourages people to try out more things. And I think only by trying, you'll find out what works for you, right? So combining the like raw knowledge that you have with you testing every single tool out there and finding what you want to use of each one, I think that will give you the best you that you can be, if that makes sense. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that you are forced to use tools, as long as you realize that a tool is just a tool and that what comes from you matters more. But through all that process, like what you said about, you can guide what the industry will do, I think you can become a very relevant creative figure if your vision is something that is different, right? I don't think that is necessarily the image that you make or the video that you produce or the 3D asset that you make or whatever it is that is the raw product. I think is the overarching message that your body of work gives to the world. I think that's where, let's call it like the secret of success. It's kind of like if you have to find one reason for why the people that are successful or the creative ones that are, it is not necessarily the image making that they do. So as an example, don't mention, is it Love, Death and Robots? I don't remember the order of the words, but that's Alberto Miogo, right? Mm-hmm. If you see like the style of things that he produced like throughout his lifetime, it's not always like the very same style, but it's like a very unique vision that he puts out there. It's something that other people don't necessarily share. Well, not that they don't share, like no one ever brought that up to the front, but when people saw it, like they wanted to share the experience with that. And then like the visuals at the end of the day, a bunch of artists ended up creating that thing, right? It's not like one single person. So it's very hard to attribute like, the reason to his success is the like image that he made. It's actually like the whole story arch, it's like the whole body of work. That's where I think the like what you mentioned of you can dictate what the industry does.
Yeah, I don't mean one single individual, right?
But not even like in terms of workflow.
Yeah, it's the vision that kind of spills onto the like a river was once a drop,
like Ralph
right?
McQuarrie or something. He kind of guided that sort of style or look for Star Wars or.
Yeah, exactly. Like things change, right? It's not like the exact same thing, but the vision of how it is supposed to be like. So the paintings are done in a very different way nowadays than they were before. The work itself, like the movies, look very different. Everything changed about that, except like the overarching message and story. I mean, except for the latest movies.
That's another topic too, That's what I mean by the vision thing you mentioned as well. Like the way things are just recycled nowadays, it's always the same old formula. And you can argue to a certain point, but it works. That's why they do it all over again. Yeah, but it only works to a certain extent. People get to a point where they get tired of it. and they stop consuming that because it's no longer interesting to them. They want to see something new, which is when movies like the Spider-Verse that we mentioned come in. Maybe in the world of the video games landscape as well, like there's certain titles that bring something, like Red Dead Redemption, for instance. It's a realistic game. It's not, let's say, stylized or anything like that, but it's beautiful and it's innovative in many ways.
There's also that one game, Marathon from Bungie. That one looks pretty cool. Or like Mirror's Edge, that sort of clean, stylized look.
Right.
Yeah, these are just a bunch of different examples, but
well, how can we conclude this episode? Because I feel like we've been a little bit all over the place. In the beginning, I feel like I pushed some buttons that might have become a little irritating for some reason. But I'm just stating like the way I saw it. Like this is the industry right now. It's convenient to use digital. It's probably gonna morph into something else in the future. The same way you had to state, I don't know, Word, Excel, or any other software from that stuff for CV to get a job back then. The same way you have to state it nowadays. You say, I know Photoshop and I know Keyshot and ZBrush, and probably in the future you'll have to say, I know Midjourney, I know this other thing, I know. It's true, bros. I don't know. That's one possibility, right? Because I don't see those things coming up with anything on their own.
No, I think the overarching message is like, that whole thing is right and it's changing and you are required to know more tools, but do not forget that
the roots,
the outcome. Not only like even if you are just focused on the outcome, right? Oh, I'm only focused on like to make the best thing possible. I think that the necessary thing for you to make the best thing possible is to go back to the raw materials,
to understand how it works.
And not only like to just understand, because if you say to understand, people will read a book about it and they'll think they figure it out. But actually, do all of those steps, right? Like go through the journey.
Foundations will set you up for life. They'll never,
because then it doesn't matter the tool that you apply on top of it. Like your icing can be anything because the cake below it, it's perfect.
I just keep remembering this thing from, I forgot which movie it was, something from the Avengers. Tony Stark telling Spider-Man, if you're nobody without that suit, then you shouldn't have it. So I think this applies to this whole topic we're trying to cover here. If you want to use the fancy tools, then you must understand what makes them fancy, what makes them work. You must understand the steps you're skipping. And only also, when you are able to do that perspective like you did on your episode, then you can probably try to use 3D and cheat that part, because you want to cut down the times that it takes you to calculate this exact perspective line here and here. 3D does that for you. But if you don't understand how that works first, you're going to have a lot of trouble.
And then it's to understand like what the tool gives you and what it doesn't give you, because there are shortcomings to every tool as well. Also, like we were talking about realism as well, right? When you talk about all of those tools, trying to emulate realism. But remember that reality is like interpreted by our own eyes. It's interpreted by each person. If two people look at the same sunset, even though like the world around is the very same, they're not perceiving the very same thing. And what we are sharing is that perception. Like you are sharing your vision. You're not sharing what's there. You're not sharing like this pen. You are sharing what you see of it, what it makes you feel.
Yeah, it reminds me of something I read on a book once.
Wait, you read books? What the hell? No,
we have to, bro.
God damn it.
It was very short, very brief. Two business guys from a shoe factory brand visit a poor country. They come back with two different perspectives. Although they've been to the same place, seen the same things, they come back, one says, oh no, there's nothing to do there. No one's wearing shoes. The other one says, fuck yeah, this is our chance. No one's wearing shoes. It's two different ways to see the same thing. Nobody's wearing shoes, that's for sure. But one of them thinks there's nothing they can do, and the other one thinks this is precisely our biggest opportunity. Let's take it. No one's wearing shoes. The other one's like, nah, nothing to do here. So it comes down to the attitude as well. Although this is probably exceeding the topic of this episode, but we could expand on this in the future.
But funny enough, I think this touches barely on the previous episode of Doomer Mentality, how you see things. So folks, go back and watch that episode, because that'll be useful.
And practice your fundamentals first and foremost.
Main takeaway.
Don't neglect it. So that being said, thanks guys for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you guys. See ya. Peace.